welcome to this episode of the Theology Pugcast. I'm back. This is C.R. Wiley. I missed the last recording and wish I could have been a part of that. It sounds like it was a really fascinating episode. But anyway, here I am today. And I've had a number of adventures, and one of those adventures has been attending Peter Thiel's Antichrist lectures. But I'm getting ahead of myself. We're going to be talking about that. That's the theme of the episode. But I'm C.R. Wiley. I'm a pastor, and I'm in the Pacific Northwest. People wonder where I am at any given time. I'm either on the East Coast or the West Coast, but I'm on the West Coast now. And I've written a few books, and I need to finish some others, including one that Glenn's wife has been waiting years for me to finish. Anyway, that's enough of that for now. Why don't we kick it over to you, Tom?
Another one who has writing projects that he needs to finish that people have been waiting years on. At least they're being worked on steadily, and that's a good thing. I'm Tom Price. I teach theology, Christian ethics at Gordon Conwell Theological Seminary, and I serve a church in Plainville, Connecticut.
All right, Glenn.
I'm Glenn Sunshine. I'm a retired history professor, not on either coast. I'm in the middle of the country here in northern Indiana, where we've got about 20 inches of snow currently.
Wow.
And more coming down. And let's see, I'm a retired history professor, used to be in Connecticut. I am a senior fellow at the Colson Center for Christian Worldview. I've got my own ministry, Every Square Inch Ministries, at esquareinch.org. And mostly these days I'm writing on Substack, though I am working on a new book as well.
Okay, well, good. Well, I think most folks know that I'm a senior editor at Touchstone Magazine. And the reason I bring that up is because we've been reflecting a little bit in recent episodes on Paul Kingsnorth and his book, Against the Machine. I got to meet Paul and talk to him a little bit when I was at the Touchstone Conference. The reason I bring him up is because I'm kind of reacting to another person that is, you could say, on the opposite end of the spectrum. This is Peter Thiel. I got to meet Peter Thiel here recently. And I was invited to attend his Antichrist lecture. So he's kind of touring the country and kind of addressing small gatherings of people who are hand-selected to listen to those, and he's got 4 lectures, and they're referred to as the Antichrist lectures. One of the things that you are requested to do when you attend those lectures is not talk about them. The problem is everybody's talking about them, and I wonder maybe if that isn't Peter's strategy to get people talking. You know, there's nothing like secrecy to get people intrigued and wondering and asking questions. And it's not as though he hasn't left kind of like a trail of crumbs out there that you can follow and get to. You know, just about everything he's talking about in the lectures. And for example, I'm going to refer to this a little bit in the course of the show. Recent edition of First Things has got an article in it written by Peter Thiel and his assistant Sam Wolf. I got to meet Sam while I was at the lectures as well, entitled "Voyages to the End of the World," and that article is essentially the first half of the second lecture. So there it is. It's all out there. And then he had an interview with Rusty Reno at First Things where he gets into a lot of the stuff he talks about in the lectures. He's been interviewed at Unheard. There have been exposés at The Guardian and in other places, I think even the Wall Street Journal. So this is like the worst kept secret in the world. So I thought it'd be worthwhile getting into kind of looking at things from another perspective with regard to artificial intelligence developments in technology, even things related to transhumanism. So anyway, that's the introduction to the subject of the day. Have you guys heard about or followed anything related to these Antichrist lectures?
I
haven't.
Not yet, no.
Okay.
I mean, the stuff in First Things I'm familiar with a bit, but not more than that.
Yeah, if you want to dig into it a little bit, just Google Peter Thiel Antichrist, and just page after page of stuff is out there. I had actually reached out to Matt Crawford, author of Shop Class of Soulcraft, and said, "Hey, you want to come with me to these lectures?" And he said, "I already been to them." So there are a number of people who are kind of out there who've already had an exposure to the lectures and have their own thoughts on them. But what I'd like to do is essentially summarize what he's up to, and then we can just reflect on it. There's a lot to work with here. So, what is it about Peter Thiel and the Antichrist? Well, if you go to these lectures looking for some kind of, I don't know, left behind kind of take on, the eschaton, you're going to be a little bit disappointed, but not entirely disappointed. He doesn't sort of limit himself to a particular school of thought. So he's kind of all over the place when it comes to, evangelical Protestantism's various theories of eschatology, or ways of putting it. If we think about amillennialism, postmillennialism, premillennialism, all that kind of stuff. One of the things that really comes through when you listen to Thiel is this guy is probably one of the best read people, around, in the sense that he understands Christian history, he understands theology. When he was fielding questions, he was able to respond intelligently in a room where you had Christian intellectuals just grilling him on just different matters related to theological traditions, teachings, doctrines, eras of the church, Catholicism, Orthodox. I mean, the guy really is impressive intellectually. And that shouldn't surprise us. He's a Stanford guy, and he also clerked in the Supreme Court of the United States. And he's the guy who was one of the founders of PayPal and one of the primary funders of Facebook. He's on a first name basis with all the billionaires. And one of the fun things about the lectures is he gave you his thoughts on different people. He let you know what he thought about Bill Gates. He let you know what he thought about all these different people. And so that was worth just the price of admission there. But when it comes to the subject matter, his approach to the question, of the Antichrist, how are we to think about it? It's more typological than it is speculative in terms of like who is it and that kind of stuff. So he frames the lectures this way. He says, "What should we be more afraid of, Armageddon or the Antichrist?" And his lectures are intended to make the case for the Antichrist. And he actually, in the course of his lecture, says the reason why the Antichrist is a threat is because of our fear of Armageddon. And again, he's using Armageddon in a typological way. He's not limiting himself to say, what, that passage that refers to Armageddon is actually getting at. He's saying, okay, we can be afraid of things. We can be afraid of technology. We can be afraid of economic collapse. We can be afraid of a meteor hitting the Earth from outer space. We can be afraid of all these different things that will bring the world as we know it to an end. We can be afraid of those things. But we probably should be more afraid of the person who will promise to protect us from those things. That's his case. That's the point he makes. So I don't know if you have any sort of gut level reactions to that. I'm going to dive into some of the things that he gets into and the case he makes and all that kind of stuff. But what do you think about just that general way of framing things? Is that okay, or does that rub you the wrong way?
I think it actually makes a whole lot of sense, because whenever you look at the rise of a dictator or totalitarian type state, it's always built on the premise of, I'm going to protect you. I'm going to fix your problems. I'm going to solve things. And, that just historically, that's the way it works. Mm-hmm. So that argument just on the face of it makes a lot of sense to me.
And yeah, I think likewise, all the way back with St. Paul in Galatians, right? What was his issue with the law and the lingering Judaism is exactly, I think, what he's getting at in some case. It's the fact that it's part of the old aeon. It's part of something that has been defeated yet wants to keep on going. The gospel is the power of God into salvation. It's a translation into the kingdom of life. This is something nothing from the old aeon can do. So someone coming along from the old aeon claiming to be able to get you into the new aeon, the kingdom of light, is far more dangerous in terms of the damage it can do to us, because it is a pseudo way. It's a false gospel. It's a lying alternative. It is Antichrist.
Right. Yeah. Well, so anyway, I'm with you. I was tracking with him through. I think that if you have a kind of disposition that is, recoils from totalitarianism, particularly, in sort of a bureaucratic kind of, communist sort of framework, even within, say, fascism, but just more generally in our age with regard to the threat of the micromanaging and the surveillance that you see, say, in communist China. That kind of, if that's something that repels you, you're going to find Thiel's case very sort of compelling that he makes, and he's thinking about these matters within a framework, obviously, where he's got kind of a horse in the race. He's a technologist, right? And a couple of the companies that he's got a big stake in right now, and I think he's even a co-owner of, are Palantir and Anduril, two companies that are involved with national defense and use the new technologies, artificial intelligence and robotics. In the case of Palantir, to identify threats. Obviously foreign threats, but also even domestic threats. So Palantir, if folks aren't familiar with the Lord of the Rings, a Palantir is a seeing stone, right?
Yeah. I was going to just note that Tolkien would have been absolutely horrified that these two companies were using names from his mythos.
Well, you're tracking with me because I had a conversation with Thiel on the floor. I was actually asked to be a responder to his second lecture, so I actually had to interact. I had an opportunity to interact with him about Tolkien, and so I'll get into that in a little bit. But that was something that was on my mind as well. So, and then Anduril, of course, is the sword of the West. This is Aragorn's sword. And the company that has that name is, I think the guy who's the CEO of that company and works with Thiel is a guy named Palmer Luckey. What a great name, Palmer Luckey. But anyway, he grew up homeschooled. And I think has a very strong Christian background. So, and that company is about robotics and artificial intelligence, basically operating, sort of automatic or automated fighter jets, submarines, different things like that. So, I mean, this is like right out of Star Wars stuff. This is stuff right out of like the Terminator, where you've got machines that are working autonomously that can kill you. And so, and the other company, Palantir, the guy who's the CEO is a guy named Alexander Karp, and I read his book, Technological Republic, which is a good book. And basically, these people who are in this part of the tech world are really pro free market, pro America. They don't suffer from a lot of the woke, mind virus stuff that you see in other places like Google or Microsoft or whatever. And so they're people that if you were to sit down and talk to them about freedom and talk to them about the virtues of the American, way of life, you'd probably find yourself, if you're socially and politically and economically conservative, pretty much on the same page a lot of the time. Of course, the elephant in the room when it comes to Peter Thiel is the guy's homosexual. And as the lectures progressed, it became pretty clear that he's got strong transhumanist sympathies. So that was another thing that was a feature to this whole thing. But when it comes to his stake in the matter, he, it's no mystery, obviously has a stake in the success of the free market companies that he has helped to fund and owns. So, well, why is that important? Well, one of the things that he's trying to address is the fear of technology. And his case, when it comes to the Antichrist, is that the Antichrist will promise to deliver us from the dangers of technological innovation, and will be the kind of person that is there telling you that you're not going to lose your job to artificial intelligence. You're not going to have to worry about runaway robots harming people, that kind of stuff.
Well, that's right where your messianic there's your play. There's your messianic idol. Technology is considered the Christ, the deliverer, and anything that gets in the way that raises the fear. Yeah, it's definitely there's your play and twist.
Yep. So there it is. So it's not hard to see that that's what his stake is. Yeah. But at the same time, just because someone has a stake doesn't mean they're wrong about everything. That's right. The thing to work through.
Heresies are always right about something. It's right. So are idolatries, at that matter. There's something there. I mean, but it's everything else. Right. Glenn, you were going to say something.
Yeah. I just want clarification here. Is he saying the Antichrist is going to be the guy who's going to tell you don't need to worry about AI and technology?
He's a little bit cagey. So he, I think, does believe that the Antichrist will be a person, that it won't just be a category or a social movement or something like that, or even a government, but there will be some very charismatic figure that comes along that is able to secure really global power. And this is another thing that he is worried about. When we think about worries concerning the Antichrist in the past, the problem has been, well, how does he pull it off? I mean, if we're talking about a global regime, how is that feasible? Well, it is now with the aid of the technologies that we're talking about.
And along with that, the homogenization of cultures increasingly that Kingsnorth talks about.
Right.
The leveling out that the machine does to culture.
Right.
But that's it. I mean, I think the really interesting part is the flip side of it. It's almost the Christological notion of technology. And you could see how, again, with all heresies, you could see how a deception could play. We heard it back with kind of, the kind of way of spiritualizing physics that was happening some time back with, I think it was Paul Davies and some of these figures back with the, Omega point and all of these things that I think they were a little too out there for a lot of people. But here you attach something about the new and the capacity to transcend the old, and then you attach this to notions very similar to the power of resurrection, the capacity to enter into a new world that isn't part of the old aeon. You can see how a flattening between the two could happen to where people would begin thinking this is the vehicle, a gospel vehicle at that, and especially for those who don't have a real deep stake in understanding what Paul's talking about in Scripture when he's talking about the kingdom of God and the kind of alternate reality that we're dealing with. It is interesting that he's making that because and
he very explicitly does. I'll play it out in a minute, but I see that Glenn has a question.
Just as an observation, Tom, I got a clip from one of the other members of the editorial team over at Breakpoint of Joe Rogan talking about Jesus. Why couldn't Jesus return as AI? I mean, he could do this.
Here we go.
Yeah. So the first lecture begins with an assessment of the Christian contribution to the understanding of history as linear in character, and he contrasts that with the cyclical nature of mythological systems in all parts of the world that precede it. So his essential case is that when we think about Christianity and we think about the Christ, we have to think in terms of linear progress, that there is something to this idea that we're going somewhere. There's a beginning, there's an end point. So when we think about the eschaton, we're thinking about an end point. Now, we can talk about how that's realized and what role do human beings have in the process. And I think that we'd find ourselves disagreeing with Thiel a lot in those particulars. But his initial framing of the matter, I think, does reflect what has occurred with the triumph of Christianity in terms of how it's transformed the way people think about history everywhere, all over the world, even in non-Christian environments.
Yeah. Now, of course, the Christian contribution also was steeped in the coming of God into the world and history setting that, in the significance of the incarnation to that, and the continuity between incarnation and eschatology. The fact that the way and the end, right? Christ is both. Are one and the same. That's why I am the way and the truth. Truth being the end point, the way to the truth is one in this one. And it was really a kind of abstracting of linear history from that kind of robust Christology, doctrine of Christ, that gave us sort of theological liberalism and gave us this stage for which scientific progress could begin developing out of its own steam, almost as if this linear notion was something that was just a given that we all could have come up with anyway, and this was kind of the fate of.
Well, but this isn't what Thiel does. You're right. That's what happened in the larger culture. But Thiel still grounds it in
that. Yeah. And I think if you're going to have a Christological interpretation of it, for good or ill, you're going to have to.
So this brings up the interaction I had with Thiel. Let me first of all return to this article in First Things. So the article is entitled, and it relates to this. The article is entitled "Voyages to the End of the World," and it is basically literary criticism looking at 4 works. The first being The New Atlantis by Bacon. Mm-hmm. The second being Gulliver's Travels by Swift. Mm-hmm. The third being The Watchmen by Alan Moore in the 20th century. And then the fourth being something I had never heard of before. Now, I'd heard of all those others. In fact, I own The Watchmen. I've got it at my library back in Connecticut. But it's that, if you're not familiar with it, it's a graphic novel. And it was a big deal back in the 80s and 90s and stuff like that. But the last one is entitled One Piece by it's a magna. I think that's how it's pronounced. That's the
manga.
Japanese manga. Japanese.
It's a graphic
comic novels and things like that. But the guy who's behind it is a guy named Oda, and it apparently is a huge deal, and I didn't know anything about it. I had to ask one of my sons about it, and he said, "Oh yeah, it's the biggest one out there." So reading this is from First Things. If you've not heard of One Piece, your children probably have, and that's true. My second son had heard about it. One Piece has sold more than 570 million copies. I had never heard of this thing, and it's sold 500 million copies, not counting the millions of fans who read the series online or watch the even more popular anime adaptation. The One Piece subreddit discussion forum has 5.2 million followers, more than any other subreddit for a work of fiction. For comparison, Star Wars has 4.6 million and Harry Potter has 3.6. So this is a huge thing. And what he does is he and his assistant, Sam Wolf, look at these different works of literature through a framework of trying to understand visions of the future that really reflect this whole tension between Armageddon and Antichrist. So returning to The New Atlantis, which is something I haven't picked up and looked at in a long, long time, and based on this and his interpretation, I think I need to revisit it. But his approach is really, I think, insightful insofar as he uses a Straussian approach to interpreting. You remember the kind of the esoteric way of thinking about literature. And the case that Thiel makes is that Bacon is actually an atheist. And he's making a case, and he's working within the framework of a Christian culture.
Yeah.
And his assistant was Thomas Hobbes. I didn't remember that. But these guys actually were quite well connected to each other. And in each case, you've got an agenda that's being pursued within a kind of ecclesial framework and language that's being employed that has a Christian character, but the agenda is definitely modernist in character.
Yeah.
And what Thiel is proposing is that the best way to understand Bacon is this idea that linear progress and cultural advancement will be realized through technological developments. And in that particular work of literature, Thiel makes the case that what you have there is an argument for the Antichrist using technology to achieve global domination. So that's his thing.
You get this very radicalized notion of dominion that is a distorted, just like you get a radicalized notion of freedom that comes through the line, radical notion of the kinds of things that are there in our relationships to them. The vocabulary owed itself much to, like you said, the Christian heritage, but they were often, and Bacon is explicit at other points. He talks as a good Puritan almost on some points, and a very proud one, restoring what was lost in Adam and all of this.
Right.
But you look at his metaphysics, you look at what's governing, and it is radical revisionism, as radical as any radical higher critic.
Right. And that's the case that Thiel is making, is that's what's really going on. Now, Thiel, to his credit, isn't trying to advance the interests of the Antichrist of technology. The other pieces of literature are different ways of kind of thinking about the relationship of Antichrist and Armageddon. And really, he's more on the kind of libertarian side of things, with the idea that technology is the thing that's going to help us to keep the Antichrist at bay. So in other words, technology still has a very powerful and redemptive character. But in this case, it's got a libertarian sort of use as opposed to a kind of totalitarian one. So for Thiel, he's very worried about totalitarianism. But he thinks that technology will be the means by which we are able to thwart it.
Well, two comments here. First of all, about the whole dominion thing. The problem that you run into is people forget the other half of dominion, which is that the earth is the Lord's, not ours.
Well, yeah, that's well, that's what I meant when they shifted the metaphysic, is they weren't relating to other things as gift and creature, but these things were no longer related to or received that way.
Right.
Yeah. The other point, though, is I'm really curious how Thiel is going to get there, that technology is going to keep us safe from totalitarianism, because all of the uses we see of it, especially AI, in sort of public life and government and things like that, are built around surveillance and control.
Right.
So how is he going to get there?
And it's interesting on that point also, the like you said, the libertarian notion, which I would say is as much a part of the distorted Christian vision that plays into Antichrist as much as the perverted notion of dominion. And if you notice how, again, back to Paul had to deal with this tension, the old aeon and the new aeon, the Antichrist and the Christ, right? The spiritual feed cannot be done for a Christian apart from what, we always call the cruciform aspect of life, the putting to death all those aspects from the old aeon. And to say that technology is somehow, it has the capacity to do that putting to death and the putting on of Christ, as though it could be a spiritual buffer against these kinds of forces, is just another spiritual delusion putting confidence in something like technology and our freedom's capacity to actualize it, rather than something apocalyptic that we don't have control over, and therefore we need to be cautious and vigilant in ways, and virtuous in ways, that technology by itself cannot.
Yeah, I want to get to that,
Yeah.
but let me just add another dimension to his kind of larger framing of the problem. The catechon, that is the restrainer of the man of lawlessness. So if you look at 2 Thessalonians chapter 2, there is a reference to the catechon, which is what is holding back the man of lawlessness until at the point at which it's no longer in God's will that should be the case. So when it comes to the role of technology, you could say that there is a kind of Christological character, but I think that probably he would also maintain that it doesn't have to be understood in that way. It could, short of that, there could be the catechon, that this is, and there's been a long history of debate in the history of the church about what was the catechon. Was it the Roman Empire? So there, and then he's pretty sophisticated in terms of his treatment of these things. So he doesn't look at things as anything as having just simply a single dimension to examine, to understand it. He looks at things as having dual roles, maybe even more. That at one point it could be functioning in one way, and in another point it could be functioning in a different way. So all of this is sort of in the background when it comes time for me to talk to Thiel. So, I pointed out to him, that, his approach to understanding Bacon is something that I could appreciate, particularly since he was taking a Straussian approach to it. And then I said, considering the people in this room, let's think about another set of works. Let's think about an authors. Let's think about the Inklings. And I said, I'm pretty sure you know about Tolkien. And he smiled and said, yeah, I named a couple of companies after some things in Tolkien. I said, yeah, I know. And so I said, in terms of how I frame my question, I said, when it comes to Tolkien in particular, it occurs to me that the place of technology in the world that we live in, and in Middle Earth as well, is pretty central to Tolkien's thoughts about the nature of the world and how we live in it. And when you look at, say, the Silmarillion or the Lord of the Rings, obviously you have different terminology. We don't talk about technology; we talk about craft. So we think about, say, the dwarves and their technological achievements, and the fact that they dug too deeply and unearthed the Balrog. Or we could think about, say, what we see happening with Sauron and the crafting of the One Ring to rule them all. And there is this capacity that Sauron has to, see things almost like you would think of like a panopticon. And then, there are the works of the elves, which, when it comes to craft, seem to be in harmony with the created order of things. There doesn't seem to be the kind of antithetical drive to control that you see with, say, Sauron or Saruman. And then I said, then there's this interesting character named Tom Bombadil. And he looked at me and said, I knew you were going to bring him up. And what I learned is he had heard about me. He knew about my book. So I didn't I didn't feel flattered by that, because I'm pretty sure they did a background check on everybody who was in that room. So they knew about, you think about it, this is a guy who probably gets death threats daily. There are probably foreign governments that have, him in their sights, and they want to take him out. By the way, the place was there were a number of pretty serious bodyguards that were with Thiel the entire time, and were basically examining the environment in which we were meeting and so forth. There was about 75 to 100 of us for the lecture, so it wasn't unreasonable for them to have done background checks on everybody. But when I brought up Bombadil, he said, I knew you were going to bring him up. And he said, and I also think he knew that I was one of the responders. And he said, you remember at the Council of Elrod that they said they couldn't entrust the ring to Bombadil because he would misplace it. He'd forget about it. He wouldn't be a trustworthy person to entrust it to, even though he demonstrates in the way he handles it that he's unafraid of it and that he has power to thwart its influence. He said, the way I look at things, I think that a better way to think about the fact that we have these technologies now, and this is another important point in terms of his presentation, we can't go back. We can't get away from this. This stuff is here. We're going to have to live with it. So the question is how to live with it, not whether or not we can live with it. And then he said, well, the reason why I named the companies the names that I gave them was because Aragorn uses the Palantir and Anduril to engage in psyops with Sauron. And he takes the Palantir and uses the Palantir and shows himself to Sauron, and then shows the sword that had cut the ring from his hand to Sauron, and that's what precipitates Sauron moving too quickly and attacking, Gondor before he was quite ready to, and distracts him from watching the borders, which allows Frodo and Sam to get into Mordor and get to Mount Doom because of that distraction. And I can concede all of that. Now, at the time, it didn't occur to me to dig a little deeper, but on a little bit, after a little bit of reflection on our conversation, I think if I had been able to continue the conversation, I would have asked him, "Do you think you're Aragorn?" Aragorn isn't the only one who looked into the Palantir. Saruman looked into the Palantir. It ruined him. Denethor looked into the Palantir. It ruined him. Pippin looked into the Palantir, and it almost drove him insane. So a particular kind of person, getting back to your comment, Tom, a person who has the virtue and the self-command to be able to handle the powers that we're dealing with. Who's really out there that we think is an Aragorn?
Yeah. Well, it's interesting also because the way in which technology works, especially at its level of development now, and the way in which the virtual has become a part of, quote unquote, the real. And if we don't have this kind of deep investment in the real, the way I think it's going to be more challenging somewhat than ever for the church, because we're dealing with, you could almost talk about this simulacrum that has become normal and real to us, become part of our reality. And without the capacity to discern and be governed by the proper limits that are good limits placed within the old aeon to help keep it within parameters and balance and boundaries, that's going to be one of the largest tasks. So it is going to be the kind of people not only immersed in the capacity and power of something that transcends this world, but also the capacity to get a hold of the real, to be formed and fashioned in ways that is able to discern and orient without being lured in to the kinds of vices and attractions that these amazing substitutes or amazing things that can become a substitute is another way of putting it, for the real thing. And I think this is the same thing you've talked about just on the level of learning and studiousness. The temptation is going to be to immerse ourselves in all the advantages that come with AI and for research and saving time and all of this, that the kinds of things needed to develop one's studiousness rather than curiosity are going to be different kinds of habits and investment. And it's going to be slower and it's going to be painstaking, but it's going to develop the kind of people that have capacities that otherwise I don't think could bear it.
Right.
So I'm thinking about your comment about technology being essentially craft in Middle-earth. The greatest work of craft in the entire history of Middle-earth was Feanor's creation of the Silmarils.
Yep.
And that resulted in practically the entire destruction of Middle-earth.
Mm-hmm.
In the course of the Silmarillion. And that was because, basically Feanor couldn't give it up. And just sort of kept pursuing it. He and his sons, until, like I said, the entire first stage, is that war, which then results in, well, it takes literally divine intervention to end it.
Right.
So
yeah.
So
Yep.
I wonder what implications that story might have on our technology.
Yeah, I think that's a very good point. I've thought about it a little bit. Now, one of the things I didn't say is that we got into C.S. Lewis when I was talking with Thiel as well. He actually brought up that hideous strength. I didn't have to bring it up. He brought it up.
Mm-hmm.
And he categorically has rejected the message that Lewis is trying to communicate in that hideous strength and in the abolition of man. So if we were to, I think many people that we believe Lewis was lampooning or critiquing in this, the Ransom trilogy, or in his nonfiction works like Abolition of Man, we normally, I guess, assume that those people haven't read that stuff. Thiel has read it all, and he just has categorically rejected it. In fact, he also has rejected any notion of natural law. He was very explicit about that.
Yeah. Well, there's it. He shares with Bacon.
Yeah, that's it. So
or the kind of relation to natural law, anyway.
Yeah, and no sense of restraint. We actually got into transhumanism in our conversation, not just him and me, but in the larger setting. And he's an interesting guy because what he'll do is when you bring up something that is a matter of real controversy and disagreement, say something like, engineering children to meet certain specifications. He doesn't object to that. What he'll say is the technology isn't even there yet, so let's not worry about it.
Yeah.
So it's an evasion. It's not. So he's not dealing with the matter in principle. He's just dealing with kind of the nuts and bolts of whether or not we're going to be able to pull it off.
And so, libertarian, then it makes sense. I mean, libertarians of that stripe are those that don't believe there is anything that limits the will. No natural law or command or duty governs the will. The will is free to enter into territories and terrain, and that's why his fear of any kind of totalitarian is almost. I mean, we should, but I'm just saying that would definitely play a part for someone who is that kind of has that view of the human being. But it's interesting because it really does push you to have to answer the question you asked a minute ago about who's going to drive this ship. And it is an open conversation in Christian circles about how far and how much, and what role can these technologies have in even Christian purposes. Christianity has used technology over and over again to build cathedrals and do amazing, stunning things with the Christian imagination immersed in a kind of understanding of the transcendent and I think what I would call the real otherworldly. And its beauty has had a lasting impact and has been one of those parameters that have helped keep at limit those boundaries of the created order that Thiel doesn't necessarily recognize. And so we have those things. The question is, how much investment do we have in participating in these technologies, even if it has the good intention of wanting to direct them towards proper kinds of ends? Is there is there an almost complicit giving into the Antichrist by going down some of these paths?
Yeah.
Well, and by the way, that's particularly true of evangelicalism.
Yeah.
Because the evangelicals, probably more than any other branch of Christianity, has always embraced new technologies, particularly for purposes of communication. And AI falls into that category. It's one of the things that you get out of AI. So, the evangelical world in particular, I think, is susceptible to that, to the kinds of issues you just brought up.
Yeah. Yeah. There are all kinds of things that, connect to this. And I think, returning to the question, who are you? Are you Denethor? Are you Saruman? Are you Pippin? Are you Aragorn? I think most evangelicals and the people that come immediately to mind who are the most enthusiastic about the new tech that I know, I would say are Pippins. They are very naive. They've got a very superficial read on things. Mm-hmm. They actually agree with Bacon and Thiel about the vacuous character of the physical world, that it just basically is a kind of Play-Doh that we can shape any way we please. They will, of course, deny supporting the transhumanist project, but in every other way support the developments of the technologies that bring you and make transhumanism. I look at some of these guys and I just think, when are you going to put the antenna in your head? I mean, I don't think you have any argument you can muster against doing so. You'll probably be one of the first adopters. So, there's a lot here to worry about and think about. But I think his larger point is a really important one to take and consider. He uses the advent of nuclear weapons at the end of the Second World War as a kind of first run on this whole thing. So you remember Wendell Willkie? He ran against FDR and, of course, lost. But it's amazing that the guy was running as a Republican, because apparently he had kind of delusions of sort of a one-world state. And he published a book following his loss to FDR, and FDR actually sent him on a tour of the world to try to basically kind of gather, some experiences that would provide him with the basis for thinking about kind of recommendations he could make to the United States government about how to proceed in the years following the war. But he published a book entitled One World, in which he made the case for a one-world government, and it was the best-selling nonfiction book in America in history. And I don't know what the final numbers were on it, but it just goes to show how short our memories are, that I didn't even know about this book. Thiel presents it and presents a lot of supporting documentation, concerning the book, documentaries that have been produced following the war. There was just a kind of, you remember it. I mean, if as a kid you sat around watching science fiction in the 1960s like I did, and you saw all of the films about, nuclear contamination creating genetic mutations that result in like monstrous ants and stuff.
Godzilla.
Right, all that stuff. There was this. It was just everywhere,
But Chris, the other side of it is Star Trek, where you've got Asians, you've got blacks, you've got Russians, you've got Americans all working together. It's
one world government.
One world government.
Right. But of course, that was the dream. And basically the slogan was one world or none. So, to counter better dead than red.
Yeah.
But anyway, so that's kind of he says, this is something that's happened before. And to our credit in the West, we didn't fall into the ditches on either side, a kind of attempt to create a world state or nuclear holocaust. Mm-hmm. We found a middle way. We found a third way. And I think understanding Thiel in the best way is he's trying to make a case for that. He's trying to make a case for a third way. He's saying we don't really want Armageddon either. It's not like he's saying, we're gonna have to live with Armageddon if we don't want the Antichrist. He's saying no, there really is a third option that we should be looking for, and I give him credit for that, and I'm on board with that. My questions have to do with, do you really think you're Aragorn, Peter Thiel? And if you're not, who is? Are we all going to have to kind of rise to the occasion? Because of the nature of this technology it's ubiquity. When we're talking about like nuclear power, I mean, there are some people who do work with it, but I mean, they're just a tiny minority. But now with this stuff, I mean, it's everywhere.
Well, and the capacity to do astronomical amounts of harm to humanity itself, much less anything else, are just, I mean, they're mind-boggling. I mean, you see it already, the way in which these people are completely absorbed in their social worlds that are completely, they have no relationships at all. I always bring it back to that because that's usually our first friendship and family, right? The first connectedness to reality that we have to get into it is completely mediated through this machine. And they're good. There are plenty of goods. We're doing this right now through it. But on the flip side, if that's the only thing one has, and for many people, increasingly it is, it's not simply about loneliness. It's about the way in which this becomes a factor so fundamental to our identities and our ways of interacting with things that we are already, you don't need to put an antenna in the head. We already are connected.
Well, the social media is its own sort of issue. But the problem is with AI, it's quite possible to develop friendships with bots who can interact very realistically with you. Mm-hmm. The other major problem I see with AI at the moment is that it is teaching an entire generation not to think.
Right.
I mean, the ability to think for yourself, to analyze things yourself, to read, the destruction of, this is a long-term problem, destruction of attention span, all of these kinds of things. I don't see how those get redeemed.
Yeah. Right. And I think one of the classic things for Christian faith, much less just good philosophy, realist philosophy, is memory. And I've noticed myself the way in which I can just put an email address or a phone number in. I don't memorize it anymore. And I've noticed a slag happening. And I'm trying to make those small kinds of things. So, I'm going to try to memorize that. I don't want to lose certain things. And I think we shouldn't. And we are. And again, these may seem trivial, but I don't think they are really. I think these are immediate impacts of what is happening to people who we've lived in a different world, and we may be able to see them. Some have not.
Right. Yeah. So those things are all concerns I have too. And beyond those matters, when we have the robotics revolution, which is just getting underway. Yeah. Particularly with humanoid robots. And then on top of that, we have the biotech stuff, the ability to genetically create people with maybe 3, 4, 5, 8 parents. I'm not making this stuff up.
You're right.
So what we're doing is we're messing with just such, with fundamental building blocks of reality in such a way that we're basically playing kind of a Russian roulette. We don't know what the outcomes will be, but we're like, well, we have to do these things because there's kind of a technological imperative to do so. And
if we don't, the Chinese will.
The Chinese will.
Or whomever.
Yeah. So all of these things are in play, and we don't know how they're all going to play out. I mean, I think,
Chris, just a quick note. One of the basic principles of medical ethics is you don't do experimentation on people without their consent.
Yeah.
However, if you are doing things that involve gestation, you are automatically doing medical tests without the consent because the baby never consented to this.
Yeah.
And we have no idea what the implications are of all this.
Right. Yeah, my sense is that Thiel doesn't have the same scruples that you guys and I have concerning these things. I think he's my sense. He didn't say this explicitly, but he gave us enough to work with to kind of guess that he's kind of willing to do those kinds of experiments to kind of see what happens. Is that so? You could say, okay, well, we have someone who's willing to dare to do really kind of dangerous things in the hope that something really beneficial could be, discovered in the process. And there's something to be said for that. It's not as though we should just pull back into our shells and wish nothing was ever discovered that might change things. But
I think the utilitarianism going on there without any governing
right.
metaphysic attached to a reality that has parameters and definitions that are given
Right.
already makes you lords of it, and in a very problematic way.
Yeah.
If you are Thomas Edison and you are trying to develop a light bulb, and you experiment with hundreds and hundreds of filaments, and none of them work until you finally figure out one that does, that's one thing. But if you're doing that with human beings, that's another thing altogether. Yeah. And that's the problem. What's happening is that they're taking the kinds of things that were done, by inventors like Edison or people of that sort. They're taking those things and now they're applying them to human biology.
Well,
and that is a disastrous category switch.
But that's where the utilitarianism, because it's like the old trolley problem, right? If you can do more good from the outcome of experimenting on, pre-conscious whatevers in their mind, that if you don't believe in natural law, or that there is a kind of given there, other than just kind of potential to be realized in a variety of ways. And we can do the outcome for those conscious and that have been granted the privilege to live. I don't think they have a boundary that's sacred around, for them, a fetus or a fertilized egg, where
no, there's not.
Yeah, and so for them, this again, it's potential for a variety of things. And again, they always talk in a utilitarian way. The ends justify anything we do. This instrumentalizing logic. This is where he's very Cartesian still, and this is probably underwrites his libertarianism as well.
You know who else made that argument? Mengele.
Yeah.
It really is effectively, they thought they were doing experimentation on people who were subhuman. They weren't fully, persons with any kind of rights. And after all, there were good things that could come from this. You could learn things on how to treat Nazi soldiers.
Yeah.
How long does somebody have to survive in ice water? These are useful things to know in the military.
Yeah.
It's the logic is no different.
And I think coupled with the temptation, as you said, in a competitive environment for who's going to control the world. This is really one of the temptations with this stuff. For example, a Christian society that would say, studiousness is the better approach than curiosity. Receiving things the way they're given and working in accord with those givens to respect those boundaries is where we'll take our technology. But all these other countries aren't, and they're going to be utilitarian, and they're going to create things that in the end are going to do us in such a way that we won't have our way of life or everything else. So there is this kind of satanic pressure to force people, maybe otherwise of quote unquote goodwill, to already put their cards in the game.
So if Thiel were with us, if he were another talking head alongside our heads, I think he'd say, "You're making my case for me, because what you helped to justify is the rise of the Antichrist."
Yeah.
Because of the fears that you've got, that we've just been sharing for the last 15 minutes about what technology is bringing about. will help to justify the establishment of a totalitarian regime that will seek to control. You can see it in all sorts of places. So, our friend Brad Littlejohn, he just had a piece in the latest issue of World Magazine where he was basically calling for more government regulation of artificial intelligence development. And Thiel would say, "Well, there you go." There you go. So you're creating the conditions to justify the Antichrist.
Yeah.
And yet at the same time, he's creating the conditions that will create the Antichrist.
Yeah. So, but and I didn't get into a whole other feature to his first lecture that was really fascinating about what he sees as a kind of slowing down of technological advancements, or sort of advance, more generally speaking. And that we've entered into a kind of stasis. He actually, in the course of one of the lectures, asked the question rhetorically, is the singularity in the past or in the future? In other words, what he's saying is that the scientific and industrial revolutions transformed the world in ways that people who lived before those revolutions could not have imagined. And that's in the past. And now we have slowed down in every area of scientific endeavor. And the only exception has been, basically the digital realm. When it comes, and he talks about the difference between atoms and bits, and the fact that when it comes to atoms, we haven't done anything in the last 30 years. So anyway, it's all.
I think it is interesting, your comparison between Littlejohn and that this is very much a habit, and I have a lot of sympathy with that kind of boundary approach, respecting. Right. Certain things. But on the flip side, I get it, because one of my criticisms of a lot of the retrieval work that's going on is it ignores a few things, and I know we've got to go, but it ignores a few things. One is we are related to a genuine transcendent, which we don't allow it say the way the early church did and Christians have had to do, where we don't have wisdom for something, and we need to cultivate the orientations to receive purification to see properly. This is the only way forward. It's not in our imagination. It's not in our returning merely to a set of old ideas. There's wisdom there that points to the source, but we have to be oriented to things ultimately the right way to be able to gain that wisdom afresh. It is apocalyptic rather than just merely Armageddon or merely Antichrist.
All right. Anything you want to say as we close, Glenn?
No, I think. The only thing I would do is point out to Tom that you just articulated in a lot of ways the epilogue of the discarded image. We can't make believe modernity didn't happen, but we can go through modernity and we can recover.
Yes.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
Some of the things that modernity left behind. So.
Yeah. That's my hope is at the end when I think about these matters. But anyway. To wrap up, I anticipate writing something for Touchstone on my experience at the lectures. I actually went to Sam Wolf, the kind of the right hand man to Peter Thiel, and mentioned it to him, and he said that'd be okay, except Peter will want to see it before it's published. and I get it. He wants to make sure I don't misrepresent him, and sure. That's fair. But anyway, so at some point I'll be getting back to this and I'll be writing something about it. Right. Anyway, thank you though for listening to us ramble on about a lecture that none of you actually attended, and actually two of us didn't. I was the only one.
We can talk about anything.
That's right.
That's what they pay us big bucks for.
But I think we were, it would have been great for you guys to be there. Yeah. Because those would have been great questions to have asked at the event or the events. But anyway, that's enough for now. And I guess I would like to wrap up with this thought. End of the year gifts, those are always appreciated, and when you give to the Pugcast, it is a tax deductible donation. We also are falling a little short on a monthly basis when it comes to the cost of producing the show. And if you would consider becoming a patron of the Pugcast, it would be much appreciated if you decided to do that. And there's a link in the show notes for that. And we'll have some links in the show notes to some of the things that I referenced earlier in the episode concerning the Peter Thiel Antichrist lectures. Anyway, that's enough for now. Bye-bye.
Bye-bye.
Bye.
Theology Pugcast is a ministry of Westminster Presbyterian Church in Battle Ground, Washington. The Theology Pugcast is produced and edited by Wiley Craft Productions of Nashville, Tennessee.